You're listening to Probability Matters, brought to you by the Rocky Mountain section of the AIHA. Welcome, everybody, to the first inaugural episode of Probability Matters
1.0.
1.0. I am your host, Kyle.
My name is Mwangi.
And we are the hosts of Probability Matters. So, we're kicking things off with everybody. What is Probability Matters? I got that question a lot based on our 0.5 episode. Did you get that one too?
I got, are you guys going to mention probability like 20 times? Are you guys going to do some math? Should I bring my calculator?
Definitely bring your calculator. It's definitely going to be a math-based podcast. I think what would be helpful for everybody is to maybe get to spend a little bit of time to talk about the origin of what people can expect from this podcast and why it started.
Yeah, Kyle and I, over many lunches or many coffees, we'll start talking about maybe a common problem or just an observation. And next thing you know, we're sitting there, which was with something that was supposed to be a 15-minute or 30-minute conversation. All of a sudden, it turns into 45 minutes. And we'll talk, and then we'll say, hey, I wonder if this other person we know thinks the same thing. And guess what? Next thing you know, we have a bunch of friends who are maybe talking about probability, right, without their calculators.
Right.
And so we thought, wouldn't this be a good idea? Maybe just take our lunch conversations and see whether they can help somebody's 45-minute boring drive to wherever they're going.
Absolutely.
What do you think, Al?
I mean, Top 40 radio has its place, but you put a little bit of Probability Matters in every twice a month, that'll get it going for you. I think one of the things we wanted to talk about first off is this concept of having a safety industrial hygiene podcast that sounds like a math podcast. And I think we intentionally did that. And the reason we did that is because the safety industry is ever evolving. And one thing that you and I have hit on is that we believe that one of the main areas for improvement is within data, and maybe that the safety profession and industrial hygienists need to think about safety and IH differently in terms of data.
Yeah. When I've been asked the question, okay, what's the difference between safety and industrial hygiene or environment, or when I've heard other people answer that question is, well, safety is very black and white. You have a grinder, you have to have a guard on it. If you have a ladder, this is how far you can, this is how you need fall protection, and that's it. It's very black and white. And then I've also heard it say, well, the industrial hygiene, well, there's the math, there's the statistics, but there's also this professional judgment thing. But even still, while you're doing what you're doing, there are some other challenges that are not in your standards. There are other challenges that you don't hear in your classroom. And I think that's what we want to speak about here too. And even with probability itself within safety, like you said, Kyle, yes, it may be black and white about when to wear fall protection, but inherently, maybe it's about the probability that fall protection, what is its failure rate, right? How often has that ladder been used? Truly, if you really want to get down to assessing risk, let's say. And I'm not saying that's what we're going to do in this podcast.
No.
But at least we want to have some of those other questions to say, okay, what's the bottom of the iceberg, right?
Right. Right. And I think from my perspective, being in and around the industry for the better part of 15 years, I am not a degreed safety professional. That is you, Mwangi. Again, you're the smartest person in the room as a degreed industrial hygienist.
Well, there's only two of us here.
But 1 out of 2 ain't bad. But I think from my perspective as well is that, okay, once we've put devices or equipment in the field, the inherent nature of the equipment doesn't always mean that it's going to do what it needs to do. And oftentimes when people take a look at that, they often find that maybe this equipment isn't being used the way I needed to, or maybe I'm being highlighted on things I had no idea about. So with that being said, episode 1, I think we were talking about, you posed the question. What was the equation that you posed?
So take safety and raise it to the power of data. and that is what's happening tomorrow.
Right. I like that. I like that a lot.
Because what we're doing was we're today the devices that a practitioner would use. It's kind of like, right, we went from 3G, which is really hot, then we went to 4G, which is really hot, right? And now we're going to 5G, and the safety as a discipline, the way it's being implemented is being raised to this power of data, right?
Right.
And it's important to address that. The reason I say power is because it's not just a quick linear thing. It's when you raise something to a power, what happens? And anytime you go in increments,
right,
it's a really big change. It's a big step change. And so I believe we're seeing that perhaps what our profession is doing is maybe sometimes maybe just dragging our feet instead of addressing the problem, like you said, with devices especially.
Right. And so if you were to use that same mechanism of safety, so is safety is it a 2G? How many bars do we have in safety? Like how if you were to look at it through that where do you think safety's progressing?
I don't know. Maybe you go to like a safety doctor and he gives you a physical and tells you what your safety levels are, right?
It's possible.
I think is it you, the individual? Is it your organization or who you represent, right? And I think that's the scale you have to measure it by, right? You may be a forward-thinking person in an organization that is 2G,
right?
And that's your battle. You may be in a 4G organization and you're a 2G guy, right?
Right.
So that measure has to be done first. Mm-hmm. Recognize where you're at, because you can't say this is where I'm going if you don't even know where we're at.
Right.
Which then begs, what kind of resources do I have, or what do I need to then get to where I'm at?
Right, and it's your opinion, and I think mine as well, that the industry needs to have and embrace as many resources as they can, and note that even with those resources, we're not solving everything, but not investing in those resources and not acknowledging the opportunities, that's a problem. I was last week I was at an organization, and they have a saying at their company. It was "be better," and I believe in terms of safety, where's the "be better"? And I think the "be better" data is a whole lot of frontier of "be better." It is not the only "be better." Don't get me wrong. There are multiple disciplines of safety that are highly a lot of merit. I think what we want to highlight is just the "be better" capabilities of data.
Yeah, that better could be, or oftentimes is, know where your holes are. Because unless you get that data, you don't know where your holes are.
Right.
Right. So better doesn't necessarily mean maybe even your injury rates necessarily drop the next day because you have this data, but the data is going to show you more about where your risk is, right? And then help you prioritize that. But that's not easy. Right, and it's you may not have a plan. You don't know. Sometimes you don't know what you're going to find.
Right.
Right, and it may be at your comfort zone.
Yes.
And so maybe even then, it's you have to be as ready as you can be for whatever's going to come.
Yeah, I sometimes I'll talk to organizations, and this is a bit vivid imagery, so warning for our listeners, but it's kind of like turning on the black light, right? Turn on the black light in the hotel room, like, dude, okay, nope, yeah, I kind of thought that was there, but yep, it is right there.
And what were you going to do now you found out what you see?
Yeah, exactly. Now, here's the interesting thing I think that always gets me is in terms of the frontier of data is more data to me equals more liability. You had just mentioned, I got to do something about this. So is it easier, right? Is it easier in the sand as opposed to out in the open air and in the elements? And that is a question I think that gets posed a lot is I'm of the opinion that data is there regardless, and that ultimately knowing data and actioning upon it and having plans in place is better. You're better off than putting your head in the sand, pretending it doesn't exist, and then just waiting for these problems that will naturally manifest, usually, unfortunately, sometimes in a catastrophic manner.
It's easier in the sand because sometimes you assume, okay, a catastrophe happens, and then, that's when we would change our minds. And more often than not, we actually dig ourselves more in the sand and say, well, that was an anomaly. We're good, and it is much safer there. But it catches up to you. And that's why coming back to, you go see the safety doctor, because the question is the consequence going to be on you, the individual, or is you putting your hand in the sand going to affect other people? Obviously, the health and safety of workers or, the public, but also, again, what organization you represent.
Right.
And do they know that you're putting your hand in the sand?
Right.
Did they hire you as a hand in the sand guy? I don't know. Was that a gradual process?
Yeah. And is it a cultural shift? Is it just that it's too big of a problem and people are afraid to stand out and say, hey, we want to go ahead and do something about this?
So if you take a head in the sand kind of guy,
or gal.
Kyle or gal, there's I understand that this quote is misattributed to Henry Ford. He didn't actually say it, but it goes something like, if I asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses.
Right.
And the point there is, if all you know are horses, then then you don't see a car. But unless somebody comes and says, I have this dream about this car, this thing called a car.
Right.
Maybe only some early adopters will do it. So I see the head of the sand guy, like I said, as the person who says, just give me a faster horse. I'm kind of good with horses. So for that guy, data is going to be more of a, if you give him the data, he's going to see it as a problem. Maybe you're giving him something he doesn't want, right?
It's something that's more expensive, and now I've got to feed it gasoline instead of oats. And
even then, right? It's not like cars came out and they were like Teslas of today or S500 Benz. They needed a lot of work. There was a lot of accidents. So there was about the vision of what it could be. And so even at a time, maybe the car couldn't compete with a horse.
Right.
Or versions of cars couldn't compete with a horse. But where you would go with it eventually, a horse would remain a horse.
Right.
But the potential for a car or that whatever that means of transportation, the potential is far out. So I think one of the things we want to talk about, and I wonder what you have to say is, so like, how are we looking to that? And so to you, this sand in the hand person receives this data. What's the consequence?
Well, and I think this is the really hard thing in terms of the safety professionals that I speak to, because I see a lot of quotes like "drive to zero." Nobody dies. We want to have people, eliminate death, and these are all really good things. The problem with that sometimes is those are very, very difficult goals, and some may argue unattainable in terms of aggregate statistical probability. But I would say that what's the alternative? Right? What's the alternative? If you believe that everything is just going to be too difficult and let's say the ROI on some of these things aren't quite worth it, then why are we doing this? Why are we in this profession to be able to have it? Because nobody, I don't think, wants to write down this is the acceptable amount of people that they want to kill.
No.
And I think that the challenge becomes that we have to really embrace it and look at, when I talk to people, I find it helpful to use other mechanisms. So you use your horse and car analogy, which I think is great in terms of the vehicle of safety moving forward. If we look into our consumer lives, we are inundated with devices that are there. I mean, if I walked around to you and told you like 15 years ago, hey, every 3 years you're going to spend close to $1,000 on a computer that's going to be in your pocket. What? I'm not going to spend $1,000. What benefit is that going to have to me? And I think the hard part is in safety, those benefits don't come immediately, right? No. So I'm going to say, hey, we're going to invest in this. And by the way, your incident rates may go down a couple percent, maybe half of a percentage point. So it's really hard for people to embrace it because it's just inherent human nature. I'm going to invest in something. I want an immediate return. I don't want to wait. And a lot of the times this is lagging, it's waiting, it's preventative. And so if you do your job, you may not even see it. Yep. And that's difficult too. And so I think we all know that it's there. The one thing I would say though is that it's healthy to approach this journey with some skepticism, because right now I think we're almost at max awareness. Like last year, we updated our kitchen stuff, and apparently the only refrigerator you can buy has a giant screen on it, and this thing can send you text messages. Okay, so we're in this world now, Mwangi, where refrigerators are sending me text messages. Wow. Yeah, and it's, by the way, it's cold. And so we're at the point where now we're getting all of these amount of awarenesses that we've sort of gotten. Okay, now I've gotten a phone call. Now I can get a phone call from a loved one. That was a good awareness we never had before. Now we're getting to the point of like, oh, cool, Uncle Jeff had eggs for breakfast. Awesome.
Yeah.
And what's happening now is that data overall is being somewhat delegitimized because it's so ubiquitous. It's so common amongst everybody. And now all of a sudden, safety's on this frontier of we can tell you real-time situations, but it's competing in that same phone that's going to buzz and vibrate and ding for all of these other things. And obviously, I believe these are some of the most urgent and important, but they're being drowned out.
They're being drowned out, and we're lagging, right? So the refrigerator that sends you the text, or which maybe gets linked to a grocery store or something like that. So somebody's collecting this data about Kyle, how many gallons of milk he drinks for some benefit, so that then the ad can pop up on your Facebook to show you, hey, you need your milk or whatever.
Are you a dairy industry conspiracist? Is that what this is?
Yes. No. So, the large company that's like our, audience will know, companies like Google or Facebook. This morning I opened up Facebook and it gave me that, hey, do you want to turn on face recognition? This is what it really does. They're using it for their benefit, but I think I'm not seeing that we are doing the same. And I want us to be a little bit more selfish. Not that I want to, again, know what's in your fridge, Kyle, but are we also approaching our discipline in the same manner? Because their ultimate goal is to know you so well that they can predict what you want, or the new sneaker came out, so then I'm going to send Kyle that. Why don't we do that? Why aren't we so interested in our people and what they do that we want to do that? Because our thing is more noble. We want to save people's lives.
Sure.
We're not trying to sell you like the next PlayStation. We're trying to save your lives. And so why don't we do that?
Well, the reality that you're delivering is just what happened today. You're right. I'm going to give you that tomorrow. That's it. That's all. Like the same sort of like subtle anger and a little bit of sadness, maybe some happiness. All that tomorrow.
Yeah.
Sign me up. That's kind of an interesting, because some people always take tomorrow for granted.
Yes.
And we all know in safety and industrial hygiene that doesn't always exist, and that tomorrow, maybe a distant tomorrow, may not happen because of things that are happening today that are happening in a more of a chronic fashion than in acute fashion. And we know that these things are happening, but we're finding out about them so much later. I mean, silica being a prime example of things that we're trying to find. And so the struggle is okay, so you've got arguably some of the more important data that we're just now getting, because now we're getting investments in these devices, but they're not providing the highest ROI.
Yes.
We're getting notifications, dings, boops, wings, phone calls that are being drowned out in a sea of likes, comments, all of those things. So how does the industrial hygiene and the safety profession navigate this such that we do talk about not new sneakers, but new days, more new days ahead? It's I don't think we've got the answer for it, but I think people need to be honest about what they're getting into and know that it takes a lot of nobility, and a lot of consistency, a lot of strength, and a lot of vision to be able to commit to it.
And I think we need to get on the bandwagon, right? So, like you said, with your phone, it used to be a phone. Now it's a computer. It's it's a music player. It's a whole bunch of stuff, right?
Right.
And maybe the devices we're using today, we should think about how do we integrate those things into that personal realm.
Right.
Maybe ethically that's a wrong thing, right? But maybe instead of a guy wearing the monitor and this other thing, we're saying like, what's the one consistent thing that this worker always has? Oh, their phone,
right?
Or their this. Okay, let's try to get our stuff in that. How can we get in that?
Right.
In that space. And again, this may be good for an ethics episode, right? Like, how do you separate kind of that information? But I think it's something worth discussing.
Absolutely. And the other thing I think that we want to talk about is just the expectations. So there's a bit from a comedian about he's sitting on a plane and the Wi-Fi goes out on the plane and the guy's like, "What's this?" And he goes, "Wait a minute, you're flying in a tube in the air from one country to the other, like from LA to New York, and it took you 3 hours to get there. Some people used to do this and die on this journey. Now you're there in 3 hours, and you're on the internet connecting with the entire world, and all of a sudden everything's awesome, but you're completely frustrated." So when we're investing in systems and devices, they may not always work 100% and give you that ideal tomorrow, but just think how much further along you are than what you had before.
Absolutely. And not only think about how much farther along you are, the question is, have you taken advantage of the fact you've come so far?
Right. Well, and I think, too, is, okay, we went out and we made the investment. But did we make the investment in our thinking? Do we have a clear vision for what we need? For example, let's say we've got, we're moving to a paperless system. So we had a bunch of papers and then they sat on the desk. And then we went to a paperless system. We got a bunch of electronic records, and they sit in a cloud server.
PDFs that are sitting somewhere. Yeah,
right. Yes. In that sense, you've got it historically recordable, which is great. But did you think further than that? What is the main objective for this, and what is the type of training we provided in the vision that we had for it?
I see where you're going with that, because I had this form, now it's a PDF. Okay, it went to that location faster.
Right.
But now if I ask you to look up 3 years ago on June 10th what the record is, it's going to take you just as much time, maybe even harder. It may be even harder than going to a file folder.
Right.
So you've digitized your process, but you've not simplified it.
No.
And you haven't made it better for yourself. And what's going to happen too, you're going to get actually way more frustrated because you think like, oh, this is supposed to be electronic. Why am I still spending the same amount of time?
Yeah.
But you haven't asked the question exactly. Just because something is digital, it doesn't make it better.
Right.
You
right.
know?
And you're absolutely right. And there's a time where you may need to look at an approach and say, I know the general momentum is going to say I need to bring tech in to solve this problem. But if you're going to bring tech in to solve a problem without all that vision out there, then don't bring in the tech, because it's just going to delegitimize the tech. It's I talked about this last year. It's the shiny object phenomenon that happens where, I got to get that, and I got to get that, and I got to get that. And all of a sudden, you've got this treasure trove of trinkets that look great and could do something for you, but they're underutilized. And that's really tough when people are putting time and effort and capital, real money on the line. And if it's only just going to sit around and not be utilized, and maybe the workforce or the company isn't ready. Maybe you've bought a 4G phone into a 2G network. Like, this thing doesn't even work. The old 2G works better. You're right. So how do we make sure that when we're being very cautious and skeptic in our investments, but when we make them, you got to go all in. You got to put shoulder in that thing. You got to get that training in. You got to understand what the actual impact is and be willing to do some hard work, because it may not be pretty right away.
Absolutely, and still that means that's you, the individual, and again, and where you're at, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you may prime yourself to be ready for 5 years from now, but
Right.
where you're at is not ready for that, right?
Right.
But that's not an excuse not to prime yourself, right?
Correct.
To think about where we're going to go, and to do that, you have to dream and maybe even ask yourself, in what ways can we be disruptive? In what ways, just like the car is disruptive to the horse,
Yeah.
maybe the horse industry is threatened by
Right.
the car. The horse lobbying industry is like, we don't want
Yeah.
those manufacturers,
What are we
making
gonna
cars
do
or
with all
whatever.
these thoroughbreds? Yeah.
Horse lobby's terrible.
Yeah. Terrible.
You have to think in a disruptive way sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
right? And obviously not disruptive meaning like change for the sake of change, but ask yourself, well, if I am just digitizing the form, but I'm asking the same questions, and I'm gonna get this PDF, well, that's not disruptive. The disruption should be even saying, why are we filling out this form to begin with?
Yes.
and what are we extracting from it? So you're asking the guy 10 questions, but you only need really one, or that's what you're using. Those are the kind of questions that we need to ask ourselves, right?
And if I'm hearing you correctly, I think the overall thought is, oh, well, disruption in safety is going to happen through data. But I think you're saying something differently. I think you're saying it's more of a disruption of maybe mentality than it is.
I think you disrupted the mentality, and then you even come back and you say, well, why is this rule even here?
Right. Because it's always been there. It's been in the rule books ever since we started, right?
Yeah.
Page 4, section 3. Page 4, section 3. How are we going to remove page 4, section 3?
You can't remove page 4, section 3, but maybe you can stop doing what's in page 4, section 3. Maybe that's a risk you take to say, like, maybe if I just do what that says, there's still a huge gap. There's still a residual risk, and that's not good enough for me, right? And that's not easy.
No.
Right? And you can feel alone. You can feel alone. And anyway, but so even there, I am not alluding to anybody go out there and break any OSHA rules, by the way. But I think it should be fair that a practitioner looks and even says, like, I understand these rules were written in blood, right? But still, is that rule just enough? It's not. It's usually not.
Right.
I always tell people, like, you look at the OSHA regs. You do what's in that book. You're doing the bare minimum. I give you a C. Yeah. Or you're passing grade. And that's not what those rules, and I'm sure somebody will agree with me, is like those are bare minimum. If you just do that, you're complying with the law. It still doesn't mean you're being safe.
Right.
And Kyle, some of what you said earlier, and this is what data should do, right? It should show you that, oh, I thought I was complying with everything, but now I'm seeing that not only is my compliance not enough, that there are other things out there, right? There are more snakes in the grass. But the person with the head in the sand is going to say, no, as long as I abide, I'm good. I'm not going to get any, compliance is going to be off my back. So, my people are going to be happy, and that's it.
Yeah, I mean, the rule is, it's like, officer, I had my seatbelt on. But yeah, you wrecked the car, like, real good. You caused a huge wreck. I had my seatbelt on, so everything's fine, right? So, I think when we're thinking about data, I when I was introduced to the concept of the hierarchy of controls, it really fundamentally changed how I had looked at things. And I know that there are other philosophies around it, but that one in particular has a special place for me because it really understands what are we going to do with all this. And the whole point of everything, every rule, everything, is always to try to eliminate death on the job and eliminate to do that. And I think what you're speaking about is how do we work through that data to prove how well we're doing at what we're doing, even though we're complying? Is compliance enough? And how far up the chain can we get to meet our vision? Or do we want to stay at this C-level area? And I don't know if at the end of the day, C's are going to cut it.
They're not. And so my vision would be like, OSHA regs be living documents, right? Because maybe some of those were written at a time when industry is reflective of certain tasks.
Sure.
And maybe some of the things that are in there are not aligned with what's happening today.
Right.
So and I'm not saying that we should have more regulations, but I am saying, like, perhaps whatever's out there should keep up with what's there today. In other words, maybe there are things that today that are in the workplace that OSHA has not addressed, right? Yeah. And may take 30 years to address, right? And so, and obviously, there are industry trade groups. You have agencies like NIOSH and stuff that do that type of research.
Yeah.
But my point there would be, just this holistic step. And again, that's why you come to the data. The data is going to tell you, right?
Yeah.
So this is what's going on here. Obviously, if the industrial hygienist in this new high-tech industry, maybe that's using nano or something like that, is way more tuned in what's going on in the process. Well, that data can feed back to the research agencies or whatever. And so then we're going from, if you comply with OSHA, it's not just the seats, you're getting to the A level or something like that.
So, and I think this has been a good discussion on the role of data, and what we intend to do in this podcast is bring on guests, primarily from here in the Rocky Mountain region in Denver, Colorado, but really talk about this, bring people's different perspectives to the challenges that they have, and hopefully that will be a consistent theme that we have throughout this. And so, I think the final message is don't be afraid to dream.
Don't be afraid to dream. And yeah, like Kyle said, these folks that are going to be on the show, they're disruptors in my view. You know? They're people who disrupt, and in a cool way.
Right.
And they're going to show you how. And, we're privileged to know them. And so we're looking forward to you joining us on Probability Matters. We feel like it's going to be a good conversation. And leave your comments.
Yeah, make sure to spread a sprinkle of awareness of Probability Matters if you can. This is going to be a lot of fun. I'm really looking forward to this journey with you, Mwangi. And with that, 1.0, and we're out.
See ya.
You're listening to Probability Matters, brought to you by the Rocky Mountain section of the AIHA.